A good Thursday morning to you. This is Pastor Mark Pierce at Church Requel, and I'm back here on my front porch again on this Thursday morning for Matthew study number 94. I was unable to conclude everything that I wanted to in this study yesterday about the Pharisees. So let's try to wrap that up today if we can. Our study again continues in Matthew. We're looking at Matthew chapter 5, verse 20, where Jesus says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Yesterday I made mention to you that it's easy for us maybe to miss the entire point here if our view of the Pharisees is a black and white, almost cartoonish type of viewpoint. The fact is that the Pharisees probably were part of a very broad, diversified Jewish population. We know that they weren't the only group. There were the Sadducees, there were the Essenes, there were others. But we know that Jesus in particular here in Matthew chapter 5 sets aside the scribes and the Pharisees. Now the scribes would not just be those who would write. We have that as a medieval viewpoint. But the scribes would be the lawyers, those who had the legal background. And so he groups together these legal eagles along with the Pharisees and says that our righteousness must exceed that righteousness. Now, again, for us to really understand this, we have to have a background and understanding that the Pharisees in general were very much the people's religious leaders. They were the ones who had the greatest concern and the greatest compassion for those who were around them. They were also men who took very seriously their relationship with God and doing the right thing. Righteousness meant a very great deal to them, probably much more so than what it does for the typical Christian today, at least that I see in our churches. So, when Jesus says that our righteousness must exceed the righteousness of them, we really have to take a serious, hard look at what he's talking about. There are a couple of cases, I think, stories that we can look at in the Bible. We certainly know the issue of the tax collector praying, who beat against his chest and prayed for the mercy of God, whereas on the other hand, the Pharisee is pictured as praying before men to be seen by men. We also have the story in Mark chapter 7, and I'll just read this to you, verses 9 through 13. Jesus says, "You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or his mother, 'Whatever you would have gained from me is Corban,' that means given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down, and many such things that you do." We know that one of the things that the Pharisees were known for was the two different laws. They had not only of course, the teachings of Moses, the written law, but we also know that they had the oral law, what might also be known as the written Torah and the oral Torah. This oral was ultimately written down into a single document around 210 AD and is now known as the Mishnah. Now, again, if anyone reads this, they get this idea that the Pharisees and those who followed were very serious about the keeping of the Torah and were actually trying to define how to best go about doing this. So the issue here, I think, that we learn in Matthew that Jesus is telling us that if our righteousness must exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees, it's not so much in the writing down of the rules and the regulations or the deciding on how to keep them, but I think ultimately comes back to us recognizing that it is only by God's grace, that it is only by God's mercy that we have relationship with Him, and that we ultimately come back to the written words of the Torah, that we come back to what we see in the law, what we see in the Old Testament, and we grapple with where the real meaning, where the real issue is. What is the underlying thing that God was concerned about? Not so much what is the legal aspect of the law. What is, how can I keep it and still do what I want to do kind of thing, but what is it that is my motivation? What's the motivation of my heart? And also, what was God's motivation in giving us this law? As we go through the rest of Matthew 5 and we take a look at 6 different situations where Jesus says, "You have heard it said, but I say to you," what we're going to see is this wrestling with the inner motivation of the heart. And so today, I guess I would leave you with 2 things. Exceeding the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees is no small thing. Jesus is ultimately saying here, these are men who take this very seriously, and yet there's more to this rightness with God than simply defining and keeping the law. And secondly, there is this grappling with the issue of the law and what it means and how we go about keeping it. And Jesus says there's more to this than what you may think it is. So I guess my challenge to those who are following this teaching and those who would wrestle with this verse today is to ask the question of ourselves, what am I doing? How am I living? Do I really take seriously not only the words of the Old Testament, but the words of Jesus here in Matthew chapter 5? Do I kind of skip over this section as something that's impossible to keep? Or do I say, no, every single day of my life, my desire, the aim of my life, the goal of my life, whether I ever achieve it or not, in fact, by myself, I know I can't do it, but with the Spirit of God, I would have the chance to please God by finding out what the motivation of His heart is and making it the motivation of my heart. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I look forward to talking to you again on Friday morning.